Good evening. My name is Alex Johnson. I'm a student at Emory and Henry College, and I am joined with Anthony Flaccavento, who is running against Morgan Griffith in Virginia's 9th District. Anthony, how are you doing today?
I'm doing swell. I'm really excited to be here in St. Paul, which is the town that I moved to when I first came to Southwest Virginia in 1985. And we're also very excited that tonight we'll be doing our 63rd town hall of the campaign, and it's focused on small businesses and entrepreneurship. So I'm thrilled to be here.
We're really glad to have you here. Anthony, I think really the first question I think a lot of people would want to know is, why are you running for Congress?
Yeah, so I've made a living for the last 3 decades here basically doing 2 things. Farming. It's part-time income with full-time work, so I've never quite made a full-time living with farming, but I've farmed for about the last 25 years and become really familiar with both the challenges farmers face and the opportunities in farming. And then my day job has always been in one form or fashion around economic development. That's what I call bottom-up economic development. How do we build stronger communities by focusing on what we have, what are our strengths, how do we tackle our own problems? And so I've been doing that kind of work for a little more than 3 decades around the 9th District, as well as other parts of Appalachia and actually other parts of the country. And I'm running for Congress because what I've concluded is that as many great things as are happening in places like St. Paul and Norton and Hayside and Galax, as much as that's happening, at the national level, you almost never hear it talked about. The public debate about what we should do about the economy, about trade, about taxes, it never touches these amazing things that are happening, this homegrown development. And because we don't talk about it, these kinds of things also don't get a whole lot of a break when it comes to the policymakers. So lawmakers are not very aware of it, and they don't put resources this way. So the short answer is I'm running because I want to strengthen these great new economies that are emerging, these strong community efforts, and I think we have to do that by bringing attention to them and bringing resources to them. I'm running for another reason, which is I like to say that the rich and the powerful already have plenty of friends in Congress. I believe that the representative we have right now is one of them. And there was just a study that came out, and a fellow showed that over half of everybody in Congress is a millionaire and on up. 4% of our elected officials are working people like me. 4%, 4 out of 100 are working people. So we know it takes a lot of money to get to Congress, but the fact is that more and more the people in Congress are themselves the wealthy elite. And that's part of our problem. That's why working people in rural communities like Southwest Virginia just don't get much help, don't get much attention, because the folks that are supposed to be our representative really by and large are not us. And so I think as a farmer and a working person, I want to represent the 9th District.
Well, I think that's a good thing to segue into, to go into now about the economy. So you told me a little bit about your background, but I think a lot of people in this region, in southwestern Virginia, really want to know, what are your economic policies? What are your plans for economic diversification that Appalachia desperately needs?
Right. So the way I look at it, Alex, is it's kind of what we can do locally and then what we can do up here, right? So locally, we've already got a lot of amazing things happening. Again, just since we're here in St. Paul, I'll talk about St. Paul. When I first was living here 33 years ago, and for quite some time after that, to say St. Paul is a sleepy town would be kind of putting it nice. It was a town that was kind of slowly dying. And like so many communities in Wise and Russell County and elsewhere, as the coal industry was declining, so too was St. Paul. But several local people decided they weren't going to let the town die, and so they started working on things. And here, fast forward to today, and that same group of local people, and you walk around St. Paul and you've got a microbrewery, craft brewery that's one of the best in the region, that's attracting people from all over. In fact, Two of our entrepreneurs speaking tonight come from that brewery. We've got a trail system both in the town and around the town, and an outfitter on the Clinch River. We've got some new downtown businesses, including one right next to us that makes sort of interesting furniture. And we've got a new bakery opening. We've got a farm-to-table restaurant and a boutique hotel built into an old building that was slated for destruction. We've got an ecological center at the Estanoa wetlands. It's quite amazing what's happening in St. Paul. So one thing we can do is the federal government can support these kinds of things. Too often, in my opinion, the federal government comes with sort of a heavy hand, with kind of a cookie cutter. If you got a problem, economic decline, opioids, whatever, they want to have these one-size-fits-all solutions. I think the federal government needs to invest in communities' ability to help themselves. So invest in places like St. Paul or Damascus or Norton, so many communities, and help the downtowns come back and help create entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are critical to Southwest Virginia's next economy. So that's all the kind of local stuff that I'm a big fan of, that I've been very personally involved in. At the national level, there's a couple of big steps we could take. One is, I think we need tax policy that favors small businesses, because small businesses are the main job creators. Right now, our tax policy, that small businesses pay an effective tax rate that's between 6 and 8% higher than the biggest multinational corporations. I mean, that makes no sense. The big companies are sitting on $2 trillion in cash. Why would they have a lower effective tax rate than small businesses? So small businesses, community banks that fund them, that's where our tax policy should be helping. Second thing is, I'm a huge proponent of something called the National Infrastructure Bank. This is the idea of giving citizens a chance to buy federal bonds, like many of our parents did to help during the war effort, and these bonds would fund an infrastructure bank that would have several $1 trillion in assets, and with that infrastructure funding, we can turn around and get broadband throughout the coal fields. We can fix the road problems we have in Buchanan and Dickinson County and Patrick and Grayson County, for that matter. We can create infrastructure for new economic activities like renewable energy and energy efficiencies, all kinds of things we can do. But it takes a lot of money to build infrastructure in rural communities, and a national infrastructure bank would not come out of the general treasury, it'd be bond funded, would be a great way to get some resources into Southwest Virginia and a lot of other places.
So essentially just a lot of public and private investment into Appalachia, what you would call the Marshall Plan for Appalachia.
I have referred to it as that,
yes.
Because, you know, really, when we did the Marshall Plan, I don't think there's anybody who wouldn't agree that it wasn't money very well spent. You went through a horrific war, it was catastrophic in Germany and England and basically all of Europe, and so investing there not only helped people simply survive, but it helped create prosperity that's been pretty amazing for most of the last 56 years. Well, in Appalachia, we haven't exactly had a war, but what we have had is we've had a whole lot of people taking wealth out in the form of coal, timber, tobacco, and other things, and only a small fraction coming back to help build up the community. And the results are, you know, drug problems, unemployment, underemployment, et cetera. I think places like Appalachia, the coal region, as well as some others that have really fueled America's prosperity are due to get some investment now to build the next generation of economic activity.
Well, let's get a little bit into some more of that economic activity. So, you know, there is a lot of controversy right now, and it has been the case for the past 10 years, really, this so-called war on coal. And a lot of people still believe in the coal industry staying and whatnot, even though coal jobs have been on the decline for the past 35 years, really, in Appalachia. Mm-hmm. And really, what do you plan to do with the coal industry? Since historically, at least, that was the backbone of the Appalachian economy. Now it is on the decline, and now a lot of jobs are being lost to automation, and really other energy sources are taking coal's place. What do you think needs to be done regarding the coal industry?
Yeah, so everything I said about investment in the 9th District, it's that times 2 or 3 in our coal counties, in Wise and Russell, right here in St. Paul, in Dickinson, Buchanan. Buchanan's hurting very badly, Tazewell County. the first thing we have to recognize is that some of our coal counties, Dickinson and Buchanan in particular, are fortunate that most of their remaining coal, or a big chunk, about 60% or so, is metallurgical coal. And metallurgical coal is not competing with cheap natural gas or cheap coal from the West, because it's the kind of coal you need for the steel industry. So one thing I've said over and over is that I would work really hard to make sure that the market for met coal grows, because that's our advantage. The steam coal, the coal that's burned to make electricity, it's not only more expensive than natural gas, it's way more expensive than the coal coming from the Illinois Basin. So, but I do believe that with the right policies, we can keep the steel industry growing, especially hopefully the American steel industry, and keep markets strong for met coal. If we succeed at that, that'll allow a couple thousand to 3,000 miners and coal industry employees to maintain their jobs. But it's not nearly enough jobs. The met coal industry simply can't grow enough or fast enough to create the kind of jobs that we need. So I'd say we stabilize and strengthen that, and then we look at those same two things: infrastructure spending to fix problems in the coal fields, but to create work and jobs by the same token, and looking at this bottom-up development, like what's going on in St. Paul. There's a lot of interest now. 6 years ago when I ran, I think more people still thought that the coal industry might come back, meaning create a whole bunch of new jobs. There's not so many people that think that's going to happen now. Most people know that there's never going to be another big boom. There might be some little upticks, but there's not going to be another big boom. And so I think people are ready for new ideas about new industry, new manufacturing, and new businesses in the coal fields.
Well, I would say that some would perhaps challenge you regarding the coal industry on the issue of climate change. It is a great issue facing not just this region, but the entire world. What would you do to improve climate change legislation and to really improve environmental protection? Obviously, this doesn't just pertain to Appalachia, but really the entire world. What would you do on that front?
Right. So, myself, I'm kind of a science guy. I studied science in school, and I just believe that the science on climate change is pretty irrefutable. It is happening, and we're part of it. Here's the thing, the coal industry and coal miners get a lot of flack around climate change, but the fact is, it's our American lifestyle that is really why we create so many emissions. It's not coal or just coal. It's the fact that we have big houses and drive big cars, and we crank up our air conditioning in the summer and crank up the heat in the winter. We like to have fresh strawberries in the middle of December, on and on and on. So we're all part of this problem, not only climate change, but problems we have with air and water pollution. We've got to take some real serious responsibility personally for what the environmentalists call our footprint, because we're all implicated in it. It's just that coal, oil, and gas, most American consumers live a long way from where coal is mined or gas is drilled and brought out of the ground. We just are kind of living in our own little bubbles away from that. So what I think we need to do, number one, is I think we need to create new jobs in energy efficiency. Energy efficiency has the potential to employ hundreds of thousands of people, and I would say several thousand people in Southwest Virginia. Here's an example. There's a friend of mine who makes super insulated building panels in Radford, Virginia, right in the 9th District. He has a very successful business, employs a number of people. His business could grow dramatically, or they could start similar ones, because the panels that he produces that you can use to build a community building like this, or a home, or a church, or a school, they cut heating and cooling bills in half the use, and they're very, very structurally strong. So one approach to climate change and environmental problems is to start investing in these businesses that are making very energy efficient products, whether it's building, appliances, automobiles, etc. That's one. Second is we ought to be investing in the best land management. Because when farmers manage their land well, whether they're running cattle or raising grains or crops, and when landowners manage their forest land well, those trees and those plants on our farms and that soil, that pulls carbon out of the atmosphere and puts it into soil to build organic matter. So we ought to be rewarding and assisting farmers and forest landowners to use their land well for their own livelihood, but also to pull that carbon out of the atmosphere where we have too much. And then the third thing I'd say is that if we really want to cut emissions, the other thing we need to do is make our cities and our towns more walkable, more dense, so people can ride a bike, they can walk from work to the grocery store or to home, because all of that stuff each of those steps will dramatically reduce not only our carbon emissions, but all kinds of environmental problems. And the cool thing is that they also create jobs, and more communities that are more walkable, they also tend to have people interacting with each other more and getting along better. So there's all kinds of positive benefits from looking at our environmental crisis in that way.
Well, so I think another issue that we could go right into, since you brought up coal miners a bit, got a lot of current coal miners, former coal miners. A lot of these hardworking people, they have to deal with black lung disease, and most applicants, if I'm not mistaken, are rejected for black lung.
Yes, yes.
How would you fight for their health care?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I've said for years that when the whole war on coal language was going on, and people would say they're pro-coal, I said, well, I'm not sure what that means, but I'll tell you what I am. I'm pro-coal miner. And what I mean by that is when somebody's been underground for 20, 25, 30 years, doing a very dangerous job that's taken a toll on their health, then we absolutely owe it to them to make sure they get the best care. And you're right, there have been some improvements in the federal black lung law over the last decade or so. And one of them was to create the presumption that if a miner had been underground for 15 years and could show respiratory impairment, that it was probably black lung. It used to be that the miner was kind of guilty until proven innocent. He just had to, the companies could throw doctor and x-ray after one after another and overwhelm the miner. So even if they had advanced black lung, they would often lose. Now the federal law has switched that so that if you've been underground for 15 years or so, then there's this presumption you have it. That means it's a little bit easier now for the miners to prove with medical evidence that they have black lung. Even after those improvements, right now, as I was just at a gathering the other day, right now the approval rate for black lung claims is about 18%. So 8 out of 10 miners are still rejected their claims, even though things have gotten a little bit better. So that's something we've got to address. It's just not right. They shouldn't have to run through hoops, present evidence 3-4 times. Wait, there's a fella in Wise County I know named Bethel Brock. He finally got his black lung. He's been pursuing it for 10 years. A lot of miners die before they ever get their black lung. So we've got to change that. And here's the second thing. Right now, the coal companies pay into a black lung trust fund, and they pay about $1.10 per ton for coal that's mined that goes into that trust fund. And that's there so that when companies go bankrupt or disappear, there's still money for the miners to be able to get their black lung benefits. Well, right now that law is going to run out this year. I think it's in December, November or December. And the companies are pushing to lower that from $1.10 a ton to 50 cents a ton, less than half. They want to pay less than half. Well, if they do that, that black lung trust fund is going to just dwindle down to almost nothing. And where will the miners go? You've got companies that have gone bankrupt. Where will they be able to get their compensation? So I think we need to make sure that Congress keeps that black lung trust fund severance tax going in there.
Well, let's expand upon that a bit, since we're talking about health care for coal miners. I would say one of the biggest issues for people here in Appalachia is health care. Obviously, we talked about jobs and the economy, which is a huge issue for people here, and health care. What do you plan on doing for getting greater access to quality, affordable health care to people here in Appalachia?
Absolutely. First thing I'll say is Congress, members of Congress, should have the same health care access as everybody else. Right now, there's a special plan for elected members of Congress. So they're not having to deal with the same stuff the rest of us are dealing with before and after the ACA. So Congress should have the same choices that the rest of us have. That'd be pretty important. That might shake up some perspectives. That's the first thing I would push for. Personally, my health care, I'm like a lot of people. I'm self-employed. I'm a small business owner. My health insurance costs have more than tripled over the last 4 years. I pay about $10,000 a year for a policy that gives me a $6,500 deductible. That means I pay a huge chunk of my income, because I'm not wealthy, for health insurance I will never use unless I get really sick or have a serious injury. That's a crazy system, and millions of Americans face that. And in Southwest Virginia, we've struggled with that very thing, plus, until just recently, the lack of Medicaid expansion. So what I support totally is a Medicare for all system. It would be, some people call it Medicare Choice for All, because the idea is it would be voluntary. If somebody has a great employer, they're working for Google or something like that, and they've got wonderful employer-provided insurance, of course they could keep it. If somebody is just wealthy and wants to buy their own private insurance, they could do that. But the option would be there, and every American could choose that. The cost will come down dramatically, because private insurance companies take about 20 cents out of every dollar for administration, whereas Medicare takes about 4 cents. So we'd save billions upon billions of dollars in administration and unnecessary profits. And you know, some people question that. They say, well, I don't think that Medicare for all system would work. But think about it. It's been working for people 65 and older. So it's been working for the oldest part of our population, who also have the highest medical needs and the most illnesses, right? So if it's working for the most vulnerable population, why wouldn't it work for 50-year-olds and 40-year-olds and 30-year-olds? So I think we can phase in a Medicare for all system over time, and I believe that it's actually, some polling data that we have shows that it's surprisingly popular in Southwest Virginia.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, you know, health insurance and healthcare as a whole is so expensive, not just here in the 9th District, but throughout the country. It's so expensive. And really, I think people are looking for better options.
Absolutely. You know, the RAM clinics that happen in Wise County and Smith County, all over the 9th, that's a wonderful thing. That's an amazing thing that doctors and dentists and nurses and practitioners come together. It's an act of real generosity, and it helps thousands upon thousands of people. But really, should we have, is that what we've come to, that people can only get once a year medical care through the kindness of strangers? It ought to be that they have access to good medical care day in and day out. And the other thing I'd like to see is investment in rural health clinics. When we moved to this area, and we were in St. Paul, and then a few years later we moved to Dungannon. In Dungannon, I used to take my kids to the Dungannon Rural Health Clinic there, and it's still going today. And like a lot of rural health clinics, it delivers high quality care at a very affordable price. So I think that's what we need. That's exactly it. We need higher quality care at an affordable price, and the clinics are one part of that.
Would you support, once you get into Congress, if you get into Congress, would you support Medicaid expansion for the time being? I mean, I'm sure it's going to be harder to get through the legislation for a Medicare for all system, even though a lot of people would support it. Would you support a Medicaid expansion for people here in the 9th?
Well, that's really been a state level issue, because the ACA enabled that Medicaid expansion, and then it became up to states to decide whether or not they were going to take that expansion. And of course, as you know, Virginia just finally did that after 6 years of bickering about it. So that will go into effect the 1st of January. What I would fight is efforts to eliminate or reduce Medicaid. That's what I would fight, because Medicaid not only helps working people. People think it's all giveaways to folks, but actually the majority of people on Medicaid are working people. They just don't make enough to be able to afford health insurance. So I would. Long term, though, Medicaid would be folded into a Medicare for all type system, I believe. One other thing about health care that's so important, it's ludicrous that the federal government, it's just crazy. The federal government cannot negotiate on drug prices for Medicare. The VA does it, the Veterans Administration, but a law passed during the George W. Bush administration makes it illegal for Medicare to negotiate drug prices. We ought to be able to negotiate drug prices. People ought to be able to get less expensive drugs from Canada, so long as they meet the safety standards. The pharmaceutical industry is one of the richest industries in the United States of America, and we really should be fighting to bring those drug prices down.
Well, while we're on this topic of health care, one issue that's really affecting people throughout the 9th District is the opioid crisis.
Absolutely.
What would you do as a congressman to combat this growing crisis here in Southwest Virginia?
Yeah, I mean, it's just unfathomable that more people are dying every year from drug overdoses, primarily opioids, than were killed in the entire Vietnam War, Americans. Unbelievable, over 60,000 people. And the economic costs, all you have to do is talk to manufacturers, small businesses, and the number of people who are probably good, solid workers but can't pass a drug test. It's a huge problem in every possible way. So what we need to be doing is what we're already doing, but much more so. Number one is prevention. And part of prevention is, again, going after the pharmaceutical companies when they lied to us about the risks. And it's wonderful that so many counties in Southwest Virginia, the attorneys representing the counties, have joined in lawsuits going after Purdue Pharma and other makers for the deceit that launched the opioid crisis with OxyContin in Lee County not that many years ago. And if we can prosecute those claims, it's not just to punish them, although I think they're worthy of punishment, but the money that would come from those claims should then go into drug rehabilitation and drug treatment centers. We need drug rehabilitation centers in Southwest Virginia. We have very, very few, and people who need to be treated in care, in long-term care, have to have that. So that's what could fund that. Second thing is drug court. We have drug court in Russell County. We have drug court in about half or 60% of the counties in Southwest Virginia. This is a terrific alternative to incarceration. People voluntarily, who've been arrested for a drug-related crime, they voluntarily opt in, and then they get treatment, they get help finding a job and keeping a job. And again, at the end of the day, what you end up with for the people who go through drug court is they can overcome their addiction, they can get and keep a job, they can re-enter their family and community, and that's not only good for them, that's good for everybody, because now they're a functioning member of the society again, a tax-paying working person again, which is a whole lot better than just putting them in jail, releasing them a few months or a year later, putting them back in jail when they when they have another problem. And so I would love to see drug courts dramatically expanded so that we can put many more people through that program.
All right. Well, I was going to ask before we end this interview, are there going to be any debates between you and the incumbent Morgan Griffith? Do you have any planned debates, or? Let's
just say, Alex, if it's up to me, we'll have debates. I'm not sure where the congressman is with it. I know that he has publicly said he's willing to do 3 debates, which I'm glad for. We'll do as many debates as we can. But I also understand that at this point he has turned down the League of Women Voters and WCYB for a big televised primetime debate that was offered to both candidates on October 18th. We accepted it immediately when we got the offer from WCYB and the League. Apparently he has declined. I'm not 100% sure, but that's what I understand. I would love to see those debates. You know, as I told you, this town hall tonight will be our 63rd, and you might know that that's 63 more town halls than my opponent has done. I'm all about getting people to know me. Some people are going to like me, some people are not. But the point is, if I'm going to be their representative, they deserve to know who I am, what I stand for, what I'll fight for. And I think it's true of the incumbent as well. People need to know where he stands, and they need to have him in their community talking with them. So we hope the debates will be a part of that.
Anthony Flaccavento, nice talking with you.
Thank you, Alex. You too.